Story 1. The Whisper of Mulberry Bark. The morning begins before the sun dares to show its full face. You hear at first the trickle of a narrow stream weaving through a cluster of low hills, carrying the cold clarity of mountain water. The air smells faintly of wood smoke and wet fiber. This is the soundscape of the Joseon countryside in the mid-15th century, when paper hanji was not just a craft, but a quiet lifeblood of administration, literature, and faith. You are standing beside a paper mill, though the word mill in this time means something more human than mechanical. The building is long and narrow, made of pine beams and clay walls, roofed with dark tiles that glisten with morning dew. Around you are bundles of thin branches mulberry, the kind carefully cut after winter pruning. Their bark has already been stripped, dried, and stored, waiting for its transformation. The workers arrive silently, bowing to one another without words. They tie up their sleeves with narrow strips of cloth, their fingers calloused from months of soaking and pounding. The master craftsman, the jai, nods once and walks toward the large steaming pot at the center of the yard. This is where the day begins with boiling bark. The bark and the stream. Mulberry bark, the base of hanji, is chosen for its long fibers stronger than hemp, smoother than bamboo. Before anything else, it must be softened. The stripped bark, known as dak, is soaked overnight in the running stream to remove dirt and sap. Then, it's boiled in a mixture of lye, sometimes made from ash or plant roots, until the fibers surrender their stiffness. The smell is not pleasant but familiar, a sour mixture of wet wood and smoke. One woman stirs the pot with a bamboo paddle, while another drains the softened bark through woven baskets. Each movement is unhurried. The rhythm matters more than speed, for paper cannot be rushed. Once boiled, the bark is washed again. The workers kneel beside the stream, striking the pulp gently with wooden mallets. The sound carries across the hills: thump, thump, splash, a soft percussion of industry. Here, time slows. Hours pass as the bark becomes something new, a pale pulp that no longer remembers the tree it once was. You might notice how this rhythm mirrors the larger rhythm of Joseon life. Bureaucracy, artistry, Confucian study all rely on patience. The scholars ink stone, the scribes brush, the officials ledger, each demands the surface of hanji, made here in quiet villages like this one. Every decree and poem begins with these anonymous hands. The hidden system of paper. It is easy to forget how controlled this industry was. Paper was not simply made, it was regulated. In the 15th century, under King Sejong's reign, the government classified paper types by purpose: rough paper for records, fine for printing Confucian texts, thick paper for royal decrees. Provincial mills like this one worked under gongso, government workshops, which supplied paper as tribute. Taxes were sometimes paid in hanji rather than grain. To keep production stable, even the mulberry trees were registered. Villagers were required to maintain a certain number of trees per household. If a tree died, it was replaced. If bark was wasted, fines could be imposed. The paper you hold, were you to hold it, carries not just fiber but obligation. Inside the mill, one young apprentice arranges bamboo screens in a neat row. These are bao, the molds that shape the wet pulp into sheets. Each screen is handwoven with silk thread along the edges, its surface smooth enough to catch even fibers. The master will later teach him to lift the pulp correctly, evenly, in one motion, so that the paper's surface dries without blemish. The texture of daily life. There is little talk among the workers. The sound of dripping water fills the air. A child, perhaps the apprentice's younger brother, crouches nearby, scraping bark for tomorrow's batch. His mother hums a folk tune, not quite cheerful, not quite sad, something about the patience of trees and the turning of seasons. In the corner, a man repairs the vat's bamboo frame. His hands are cracked and ink-stained, though he is not a scribe. He once worked in the capital, Seoul, then still called Hanseong, before returning home to escape famine. He knows that the king's scholars in their white robes write upon the paper his hands helped create. It brings him a quiet pride, even if his name will never appear on a scroll. At midday, rice and barley porridge are shared from a clay pot. No one eats quickly. The heat slows movement. Afterward, work resumes lifting, pressing, drying as the afternoon light slants through the open shutters, catching the fine spray of pulp in the air. The drying field. Behind the mill, the drying yard is dotted with wooden boards. The workers lay each wet sheet carefully, pressing it flat with brushes. In winter, drying is done indoors with charcoal fires. In summer, under the sun. The paper stiffens slowly, gaining the crisp texture that scholars later describe as the breath of the mulberry. You can imagine the slow transformation of the landscape itself, a place where water, wood, and labor combine into something more durable than time. Some of the paper made here will survive centuries, preserved in archives or Buddhist sutras. Others will crumble forgotten, used for wrapping or sealing jars of pickled radish. But in this moment, each sheet carries the same care. A world of quiet bureaucracy. Joseon Korea was an empire of records. Births, deaths, grain yields, rainfall, everything was written, copied, archived. Without Hanji, the machinery of governance would stall. Yet few people outside these valleys ever saw the labor behind it. The workers here rarely traveled far. Their lives circled around bark, water, and screens. As night approaches, the master inspects the day's output, 20 sheets, each perfect, no tears or uneven edges. He nods once, satisfied. The others bow. Work ends as it began, quietly. In the distance, a temple bell sounds across the hills. Someone mutters that the river is running lower this season, less snowmelt, perhaps. The stream that gives life to their mill could one day fade, but for now it flows on, patient as the work itself. You watch the last light glimmer on the damp paper, and you wonder, how long can such quiet labor sustain a kingdom built on words? The next morning arrives in mist. The hills lie softened under a fine white veil, and the sound of water against stone is quieter than yesterday. Still, the workers arrive as they always do, their footsteps marking faint trails through the dew-darkened earth. You might expect something to change, but in this paper mill, repetition is the virtue that defines mastery. Inside, the air is warmer now, damp with steam and the faint bitterness of boiled lye. The fire under the bark pot has already been rekindled, its red glow breathing softly. The mulberry fibers, pale and pliant, are resting in their woven baskets. What began yesterday must continue today, not just boiling and washing, but now the act of making paper itself, the lift and settle of pulp into form. You follow the apprentice again, though he is not quite a boy. His eyes are older than his years, sharpened by the pressure to learn quickly. He is the son of a fallen Yongbin A scholar class family displaced by scandal, and though he now wears coarse hemp instead of silk, his posture betrays the way he was once taught to bow before a Confucian master. Today he is permitted to try the bamboo screen. His hands tremble slightly as he lowers it into the vat of pulped dak and hibiscus root mucilage, called dak pool. This slimy substance, made from the roots of hibiscus manihot, is the invisible secret of Hanji. It suspends the pulp in the water, allowing even distribution across the mold. Without it, the paper would clot or tear. The science behind the craft. This mixture, refined over centuries, reveals a deep empirical understanding of nature. The pulp must remain suspended, yet not too thick. The mucilage must cling, yet not harden too quickly. The water temperature too cold or too warm will ruin the balance. Each factor is observed through feel, smell, and sight. There are no measuring tools here. Knowledge lives in the hands. Hanji is prized for its strength and breathability. It does not yellow like Chinese paper, nor crack like paper from the West. Korean scholars once claimed that Hanji could last 1,000 years, and some samples come close. It was said that a sheet of good Hanji could be crumpled, soaked, and flattened again without damage. These qualities are not the product of chance, but of devotion. You watch the apprentice lift the screen, level and slow. He lets the pulp settle, the water draining through the bamboo mesh. It forms a thin film of even white, the first breath of a new sheet. He smiles, just a little. The master says nothing but nods once, approval enough. The hierarchies within the mill. Though small, the mill is not without structure. At its peak, a rural paper mill might employ up to a dozen workers, each assigned a specific task. The master oversees pulp preparation, mold handling, drying, and quality inspection. Beneath him are junior mold handlers, pulp washers, vat workers, and drying assistants. Even the person who trims the edges of the final sheets, always with a bamboo blade, must know the texture of a correctly dried sheet. Within this system, hierarchy is enforced by ritual. Juniors bow to seniors, apprentices observe in silence. The act of being allowed to handle a mold is a privilege earned only after months of assisting in pulp preparation. Errors are not punished with shouts, but with silence. To be ignored by the master is the worst shame. Women often handle the drying stage. Their touch is gentler, it is said, and they have a better eye for spotting blemishes or air bubbles. They also maintain the brushes made from straw or soft animal hair used to smooth and press the paper onto drying boards. These tasks, quiet and repetitive, are crucial to consistency. You might imagine the mill as a place of monotony, but that would miss the undercurrent of pride. A clean, even sheet brings respect, not shouted but understood. Mistakes are burned. Success is left unspoken but deeply felt. From hillside to court. Not all paper remains in the village. Once a month, the local magistrate dispatches a clerk to inspect the output. These bundles of paper, stacked and tied in sets of 100, are weighed and recorded in ledgers. Each bundle is tagged with a seal, indicating its origin, date, and quality tier. Good paper may be sent to Hanseong for use by the Hall of Worthies Jifunjian, the royal research institute established by King Sejong. There, scholars and scribes copy laws, translate Chinese classics, and record astronomical data. It is entirely possible that a single sheet made in this valley could one day hold a royal decree or a Confucian commentary. Lower-tier paper might be used for account books or packaging. Still, even these carry value. In a world where documents cannot be photocopied, the physical medium matters. Stains or weak fibers could render a tax record unreadable, a dangerous thing when records determine land rights, inheritance, and criminal judgment. And so, the apprentice's sheet, his first successful attempt, may one day travel to a library he will never see. Its blank surface is a quiet passport into the annals of bureaucracy. Tools and techniques of silence. The tools here are few but sacred. The wooden vat, the bamboo screens, the stone weights, the woven ropes, each has its own place, and each is treated with reverence. The sharpening of a trimming blade is a serious affair, often done at dawn when distractions are few. One of the older women kneels by the drying yard, replacing frayed binding on a brush. She hums softly the same tune as yesterday as she checks each strand for strength. Nearby, bundles of fresh dak pulp are stored in heavy jars sealed with clay. The clay is cracked open only when needed, preserving the moisture. Even storage is an art here. Not far away, a rooster calls out, breaking the monotony. A child stirs a pot of rice bran, preparing paste for sealing packages. Every part of the mill's operation is rooted in use and reuse. Even discarded pulp finds purpose, often as kindling or patching material. You begin to sense it now, the seamless integration of this paper mill into the world around it. It is not just a place of production, but a microcosm of Joseon order. Hierarchy, harmony, utility, all reflected in the flow of water and pulp. Memory in mulberry. In one corner of the mill, a sealed chest contains several sheets stamped with the king's seal. These are exemplars, perfect sheets used as comparison tools. They are not touched casually. Their edges are razor straight, and their surfaces show no flaw under oil lamp light. The master brings one out occasionally to remind the workers what perfection looks like. He says nothing. He does not need to. The apprentice, watching him today, is beginning to understand. He sees that paper is not just something to be written on. It is a record before the record. Its texture, thickness, and fiber alignment all speak even before ink meets brush. He asks a question. "Master, do you know what becomes of our sheets?" The old man pauses. For a moment, he seems to consider not answering. "They become history," he says simply, "but they do not speak our names." The apprentice nods. But you might wonder, as you observe the fading light stretch across the yard, what becomes of those who make history, but are never written into it? Evening comes with a quiet certainty. The hills around the paper mill darken in slow procession, the horizon brushed in tones of blue ash and faint gold. The scent of boiled fiber has faded. Lanterns flicker behind sliding doors, casting soft light across the wooden floorboards worn smooth by decades of bare feet and wet hands. The day's labor is complete. 27 new sheets now rest in the drying yard, not a record, not a failure, just another day's careful rhythm, preserved in plant fiber. Inside the millhouse, the workers gather for a simple supper: millet rice, pickled cabbage, and barley tea. There is little conversation, not from fatigue but from habit. When the hands work in silence all day, the mind follows. They eat slowly, savoring the warmth. Occasionally, someone will offer a soft laugh or hum a tune from memory. Most, however, sit in content stillness. The master sits apart, sharpening a bamboo slat used for measuring sheet thickness. He doesn't speak, but everyone notices the precision in his fingers. You realize that his hands know more than his voice will ever explain. Echoes beyond the valley. In Hanseong, hundreds of ri away, officials shuffle through palace corridors with scrolls and registers. On their desks, the paper stretches clean and compliant under soft bristled brushes. A tax collector calculates barley yields. A magistrate drafts a punishment decree. A Confucian scholar annotates the analects. None of them pause to wonder where the paper came from. They trust it will hold ink, resist smudging, remain intact after years in a lacquered archive. They know it as a medium, not a miracle. But it is a miracle, one born of water, bark, and unseen labor. Meanwhile, in this quiet mill, that same paper begins with the scraping of bark under moonlight. Each worker contributes not a word, but a movement: the placement of a vat, the brush of pulp on mesh, the weight of a stone. And in these movements, history takes form. Hanji does not advertise its maker. There are no stamps, no signatures. A scribe may sign a document, but the paper itself remains anonymous. That anonymity is part of its dignity and its loss. You begin to realize, this paper mill is more than a factory. It is a philosophy in motion, one that embraces humility, precision, and usefulness without demand for reward. The apprentice's test. It has been 6 months since the young apprentice first stepped into the mill. He no longer flinches at the steam of boiled lye or the sting of cold river water. His shoulders have learned the weight of soaked pulp, and his wrists now flick the bamboo mold with growing confidence. Today, the master sets down a new challenge. Prepare an entire bundle, 100 sheets, without assistance. Each sheet must be flawless, not for government use but for a local Confucian school. It is a quiet commission and a test. The apprentice does not ask why. He bows and begins at dawn. You watch him through the hours, steady, careful, disciplined. When the pulp thickens, he adds more hibiscus mucilage. When the screen warps slightly, he pauses to reset it. His sheets are light but strong, their edges feathered cleanly. His posture, once hesitant, is now calm and still. By dusk he has finished. 98 perfect sheets, 2 with minor blemishes. He burns the flawed ones without a word. The master watches him in silence, then places a hand on his shoulder. It is the only praise he will receive, but it is enough. The seasons of labor. The paper mill has its own calendar, separate from the court. Spring is for planting mulberry saplings and preparing vats. Summer brings the fastest drying, but also the most rot. Autumn is for bark harvesting, the best time for fiber. Winter slows everything but offers cleaner water and fewer insects. These seasons shape lives. Children grow up learning which stream bend offers the best clarity, which bark cracks first in frost, which hillside holds the longest sun in late October. Elders retire from mold handling to brush work. Some eventually become paper merchants, walking for days to trade bundles in neighboring provinces. And yet the rhythm rarely changes. Across generations, paper remains the constant, soft in hand, hard in memory. One woman, now past 60, recalls when she first handled pulp as a girl. Her mother had worked in the same yard. Her daughter now trims edges with a sharper eye than her own. 3 generations, all held together by mulberry bark and silent craft. You can't help but ask yourself, how many lives has this paper passed through without ever telling their stories? The vanishing of the mill. But even this rhythm cannot hold forever. The late 15th century brings changes. Copper printing plates begin to replace wood blocks. New binding methods arrive from Ming China. Officials request smoother, thinner papers for legal texts. The government, under financial strain, begins consolidating rural mills into larger provincial ones. Mills like this small, private, family-tied begin to vanish. Some are absorbed into government workshops. Others close entirely. Workers scatter to rice fields or try to find work in towns. A few stay behind, unwilling to let go of their tools and routines. This mill, the one you've followed, holds on for a few more decades. The master passes his tools to the apprentice, who has since grown into his title. He teaches quietly, just as he was taught, though fewer apprentices come each year. Eventually, the stream runs slower. The bark harvest becomes thinner, and one spring, without ceremony, the fires under the bark vat are never lit again. But somewhere in a royal archive, a Buddhist sutra, a ledger in a merchant's trunk, sheets of hanji from this mill still exist. Silent, enduring, unchanged. A last reflection. You imagine yourself holding one of those sheets. There is nothing to mark it, no name, no mill, no date. Yet in its fibers lie the memory of steam, stone, bark, and breath. The work of hands you've now come to know, even if history did not record them. The whisper of mulberry bark still carries across centuries, if only you listen. And so you might ask yourself, as the paper crackles softly in the night, how much of history has been built upon the labor of hands? We'll never know, and how many of those hands still whisper through the things they made. Venice, 1492. The city floats, as it always has, between the weight of the sea and the demands of commerce. Its alleys twist like forgotten thoughts, and its canals move with the lazy precision of a bureaucracy too old to be rushed. At the edge of the Rialto market, behind a row of fish stalls and beneath an aging fresco of Saint Mark, a merchant's accountant begins his morning. You might expect an accountant's life to be filled with numbers, but numbers come later. First, there is the light. It filters through slatted shutters, golden and thin, tracing the edge of parchment and dusty ledgers. Then comes the smell, ink made from oak galls and iron salts, still pungent from yesterday's notes. And finally, there is the sound, the deliberate clicking of calculi, small stones moved on a table to represent values. Counting stones. This is the world of Bartolomeo de Forlì, a merchant accountant in the employ of a middle-tier textile trader. He is neither wealthy nor poor, neither noble nor peasant. He is part of a delicate class that Venice relies upon, literate, silent, diligent. He wears brown wool, a bit too coarse for comfort. His ink-stained cuffs are neatly folded back. He speaks little. That is not his role. His job is not to create value, but to account for it, to record what exists, to foresee what might vanish, and to preserve what others might lose through inattention. The mathematics of daily trade. The abacus is old-fashioned, yet he keeps one near the window. More often he uses a counting board, a wide wooden slab etched with grooves, into which he places polished stones. Each stone has a meaning, A single unit, a dozen, 100, 1,000. They slide with a faint click like dry seeds. The system is Roman, though its symbols have faded. He uses Arabic numerals in his ledgers, but the tactile nature of the stones helps him keep track of grain tallies, fabric bolts, and Florentine debt. Venice is a city of trade but not of transparency. Prices fluctuate with tides, rumor, and papal decrees. A Genoese galley may bring cheap alum today, and none tomorrow. Bartolomeo's task is not to predict markets, that's for the merchants, but to track the movement of coin and cloth with absolute clarity. Each morning he updates the giorno, the daily book of entries. Not yet debellentry bookkeeping, but close. For every shipment of silk, he records the amount, its source, the price agreed upon, and any tax due to the Camera del Sale or the Fondaco dei Tedeschi. Errors are rare. If they occur, he scratches a line, draws the correction, and includes a red note recto. It is not artistry, it is caution turned into ink. Inside the merchant office. The office is sparse. A table, 2 stools, a candelabra, a locked chest. The walls are lined with wooden shelves, each holding bundles of parchment, folded and sealed with wax. Some date back 20 years, others only days. A merchant's records are more important than his goods. If a ship sinks, he may recover losses through court if his records are clear. If they are not, no claim will be heard. This is why Bartolomeo writes slowly. He checks figures twice. He sharpens his quills at an angle that doesn't splatter ink. He tests parchment with fingertips before writing. His tools are few. A stylus of bone for dry marking. Sandarac powder to dry ink before it smears. A small knife to scrape errors. A wax tablet for temporary notes. He does not use vellum, too expensive. Parchment is common, or rag paper, imported from Fabriano, where water-powered mills press pulp from worn linen. A full sheet, once folded, makes 4 pages. One mistake can waste the entire fold. Each entry in the ledger begins the same way. Date, merchant initials, commodity, measure, agreed rate, debt or credit notation. By midday, he has already recorded shipments from 3 boats, saffron from the Levant, tin from Cornwall, and wool from Dalmatia. Each transaction is not just a note, but a link in the fragile chain of trust that keeps Venice alive. The texture of Venetian commerce. The market outside bustles, though bustle in Venice is measured and narrow. Traders arrive by boat, unload goods on damp stone docks, and bark terms in Venetian dialects flavored by Turkish, Arabic, and German. A small boy runs past with a sack of pepper. A woman measures indigo dye with scales made from bronze. Everything is measured, value taxed. There is no romance in trade here, only precision. For Bartolomeo, that suits him. You begin to see how his world moves without flourish. The city's rhythm slow, repetitive, but exacting matches the pace of his quill. In the evenings, he sometimes visits the Scuola Grande di San Giovanni Evangelista, a confraternity that keeps accounts even more fastidiously than merchants do. There, under flickering oil lamps, he watches older scribes debate the merits of different ink types. They argue over acidity, fade resistance, and flow. He listens, learns, and remains quiet. Back home, he keeps a personal notebook not for business, but for methods. In it, he records conversion rates between weights and volumes, changes in tax codes, and tricks for estimating cloth length from bale size. It is the kind of book no one would ever ask to read, and the most valuable thing he owns. Trust and the invisible hand. The merchant he works for is a man named Giovanni della Torre, whose name never appears in the ledgers exactly, only as GDT. That way, if the business folds, the debts might not fall upon him personally. Bartolomeo understands this game. He does not judge. His job is to make the numbers tell the story, even if the truth is left between the lines. A shipment of dyes is missing. The captain claimed storm damage, but the insurance claim is vague. Bartolomeo makes a note. He underlines it twice. He will compare it to the bill of lading stored in a wax-sealed tube. If the captain lied, it will show in weight discrepancies. He does not accuse, he records. That is the nature of his power, quiet, precise, and invisible. By evening, the day's ledger is sealed. Sand is brushed off the ink. The sheet is folded, labeled, and bound with twine. He places it on the shelf marked Primavera/1492. Outside, the tide shifts, and the city groans in its wooden foundations. The man behind the ink. Bartolomeo lives alone in a rented room above a cooper's shop. The air smells of tar and damp wood. He eats lentils most nights, drinks weak wine, and mends his own shoes. But he owns a lockable cabinet. Inside it, 3 years of personal ledgers, a compass, a set of coin weights, and a wax-sealed scroll written in Latin. It is his teaching certificate earned at the Abbey School of San Giorgio Maggiore, once. He could have been a teacher, but the city pays more for quiet precision than for learning. Sometimes he wonders if anyone will remember his work. Then he reminds himself, memory is not his concern, accuracy is. And so you sit with him, as the candle burns low, and his ink-stained fingers fold the last parchment of the day. You begin to wonder. In a city where trade moves the world, what becomes of the man who records but never speaks? Morning returns with mist on the canal. The air carries the damp scent of rotting rope and salt. Boats brush against the stone moorings outside the Fondaco dei Tedeschi, and merchants prepare another day of goods exchange measured, recorded, and taxed with a precision only the Republic of Venice can demand. Bartolomeo wakes before sunrise. His room, small and windowless, smells faintly of boiled ink and drying parchment. A pigeon coos from the rooftop gutter. He lights a lamp with practiced economy and begins his day the same way he always does, sharpening a goose quill with a curved blade worn smooth from years of use. It is not habit, it is discipline. Today is inventory day. Every quarter, the merchant's office must submit a detailed inventory of assets, goods in storage, debts owed, and outstanding contracts. The process is not complicated, but it is slow and fraught with potential error. A miscount can become a legal accusation, an omission, a suspicion. Bartolomeo prepares as if for quiet battle. The storage vault. The magazzino, the warehouse, lies just behind the office. It is cool, dark, and built of stone, with arched ceilings stained from years of sea mist. Inside are bolts of fabric wrapped in waxed linen, bundles of dye tied with rope, and ceramic jars of saffron sealed with wax. Each item is tagged with a rough paper label. Bartolomeo lifts them one by one, comparing the contents to his records. For every bolt, he records length, color, and weave type. Wool, dyed indigo, Dalmatian origin, 23.5 braxia. A braxio is the Venetian unit of length, roughly 0.68 meters, though even that varies by guild. The records must align not only in numbers, but in terminology. A miswritten fabric type could cause a conflict with the wool guild. Bartolomeo consults a small codex of terms, handwritten years ago, containing the official language permitted by the Art della Lana and the Art dei Tintori, the textile and dye guilds. He scratches a correction beside one bolt of rough wool, changing it to semi-carded. A tiny change, but significant. Rough implies lower tax. Semi-carded suggests mid-quality. This is where the accountant's true power lies, not in profit, but in precise nomming. Ledgers and laws. Venice in the 15th century is not just a city of canals, it is a city of contracts. Nothing moves, not spices, not silk, not salt, without a document, and those documents must be flawless. Bartolomeo understands the layers of law as well as he does the grain of parchment. He knows that a loan recorded as a promise to pay is less binding than a pledged obligation. He knows which merchants can be trusted to honor verbal contracts and which require ironclad signatures and third-party witnesses. In his ledger, he maintains three types of columns. Entrada incomings, goods arriving, payments received, obligations fulfilled. Uscita outgoings, goods shipped, payments made, debts accrued. Nota bene special notes, currency conversions, risk estimations, exchange fluctuations. Today, a discrepancy emerges. A shipment of silk from Cyprus was recorded as paid, yet the coin weight measured yesterday suggests a shortfall of 4 ducati. He doesn't panic. Instead, he revisits the book of coinage, where he keeps recorded weights of foreign currencies. A Cypriot bezant, likely underweight, may have been accepted in error. He scratches a note. Weight difference observed, possibly due to foreign coin degradation. Merchant GDT to confirm exchange rate. He does not accuse, he does not amend, he simply records. This restraint is what keeps him trusted. Debt and the sea. In the afternoon, Bartolomeo meets with a notary, a thin, hollow-faced man named Lorenzo, whose breath smells faintly of vinegar ink. They sit in the back of a wine shop near Campo San Polo, where Lorenzo keeps a portable writing desk with a leather roll of documents. They discuss a new debt contract, 200 ducats lent to a ship captain who has pledged his cargo of grain as collateral. The grain is still at sea. This arrangement is common. Venice thrives on sea loans where risk is shared and profit extracted from the unknown. If the ship returns, the lender receives interest. If it sinks, the debt is voided. Bartolomeo does not speak during the negotiation. He observes, counts, writes. The notary nods. The contract is drafted. 2 witnesses sign. Later, he will copy the terms into the ledger. Note the ship's name, Santa Lucia, and its destination, Alexandria. Another silent line of trust, waiting to be tested by waves and weather. Personal affairs, private margins. In the margins of his personal notebook, Bartolomeo writes something not for his employer, but for himself. Be cautious with new scribes. Signor della Torre may seek a cheaper hand. The ink betrays intent. It is true. A younger apprentice, Matteo, has been observing his work. He is eager but careless. Bartolomeo has corrected his entries twice already, once for misstating a tax percentage, and once for revering debtor and creditor. But the merchant watches Matteo with interest. He is 22, handsome, and knows how to flatter. Bartolomeo feels no anger, only the quiet sting of recognition. He was once that young man, sharper, faster, more valuable. Now he is necessary but not irreplaceable. He adjusts his grip on the quill and writes neater than before. The inkstained map. Among Bartolomeo's most treasured possessions is a trading map hand-copied years ago from a Genoese chart. It shows routes from Venice to Alexandria, Rhodes, Constantinople, and Ragusa. He does not travel, but he follows the goods. Every bolt of wool, every cask of wine, every satchel of saffron, they mark trails across the sea, just as ink marks a ledger. He understands tides, not through the ocean, but through prices. He knows the impact of a Nile flood or a Turkish embargo, not from first-hand sight, but from silence in the cargo list. His world is mapped not by land or sea, but by patterns in numbers. When others look at Venice, they see domes, bells, and masks. Bartolomeo sees storage vaults, dry docks, and logbooks. A quiet conclusion. As night falls, Bartolomeo returns to his office. He files the day's notes, locks the ledger chest, and extinguishes the lamps. The streets below echo with faint laughter. Someone sings an old sailor's song in a dialect he can't quite place. He listens, smiles faintly, and sharpens one last quill before bed. In the quiet of his room, he opens his personal notebook one more time. He writes, "If the ledger is accurate, the debt will speak for itself. If it is not, no voice will save it." And you may wonder, as the ink dries on the parchment, how much of history has been shaped by those who never led, never sailed, never fought but only wrote in silence what others forgot to remember. The year begins to shift. Outside the counting house, the city breathes in a new season. Fog rolls low over the Grand Canal. Gulls cry somewhere beyond the domes of San Marco, their voices lost in the hum of quiet labor. Inside a narrow office near the Rialto, Bartolomeo de Forlì continues his work unchanged, unhurried, unnoticed. It is the end of the financial quarter, and the ledgers must be closed. On the surface, this is a mere clerical act, the addition of columns, the tightening of records, the sealing of parchment. But for Bartolomeo it is something more, a ritual of closure, of putting the past into fixed form. He dips his quill once, twice, letting the excess ink drip back into the well. The figures from the past 3 months stretch before him: cargo weights, transaction fees, ship names, merchant initials, tax rates, and currency fluctuations. Each line means little by itself, but taken together they form a quiet portrait of the city's heartbeat. He begins the final entry. In the year of our Lord 1492, on the 29th day of March, the ledger is balanced. He signs it not with his name, but with a small mark, a circle with a stroke, the symbol he's used for years. Enough for his merchant to recognize, but not enough to be remembered. Then he sets down his quill and exhales. The cycle of paper and coin. Bartolomeo's work is never truly done. As the quarter closes, a new one begins. The merchant's office receives news of a lost shipment salt cod from the north and a letter from Ragusa, bearing word of a new trading partner interested in Venetian fabrics. He reads the letter carefully. The handwriting is bold and slightly slanted, with ink smudges near the folds. There's an offer enclosed, a deferred payment plan payable in 3 months. Bartolomeo prepares a draft contract. He includes the proposed interest rate, currency exchange margin, and a contingency clause for non-delivery. He uses formal Latin for legal clarity, then translates the key terms into merchant. Italian, the tongue of trade, less elegant but more widely understood. He brings the draft to Giovanni della Torre, who reads it in silence, nods once, and returns to watching Matteo. The younger assistant, practiced tabulating cargo weights from a sample manifest. Bartolomeo sees it plainly now: the change is coming. The slow fade. Change never arrives all at once in Venice. It seeps in through alleyways and across ledgers. It arrives in the form of a new accounting apprentice or a new tax regulation from the Dici Savi alle Decime. It emerges in the ink, not in proclamations. Bartolomeo knows his place is becoming less secure. He is not dismissed, no one would be so impolite, but he is given fewer tasks. He is no longer asked to attend the notary meetings. Younger hands are called in to prepare draft contracts, and when he offers corrections, they are received with polite nods, but no longer followed precisely. One day, he is asked to reorganize the archive, rather than prepare new entries. He complies. Carefully, reverently, he lifts the old ledgers, each one with its season, its transactions, its silent memory of the city's heartbeat. And it is then, among the ledgers, that he finds a page he had written nearly 20 years ago. The ink has faded to brown. The handwriting is tighter, sharper, but it is his. A debt resolved, a contract fulfilled, a simple note. Grain delivered, payment received, record closed. It brings a kind of comfort, the knowledge that even forgotten tasks remain somewhere, quietly preserved. He places the ledger back on the shelf and dusts it with a square of cloth. An unexpected visit. Weeks pass. One day, as he walks along Fondamenta del Vin, watching the barges unload barrels from Florence, he is stopped by a man older, dressed in simple robes but with clear eyes and an ink-stained finger. The man introduces himself as a lector from a small guild school, looking to hire a copyist to prepare instructional manuals on merchant arithmetic. He had heard of Bartolomeo through a notary, a man who remembered his calm, clean bookkeeping. Bartolomeo nods, listens, and says he will consider it. Later, in the quiet of his room, he opens his personal notebook and writes, "To record for trade is one form of memory. To teach others to record perhaps that is another." He does not seek praise. He seeks accuracy. But for the first time, he wonders if accuracy might also be passed on, like a coin handed from one palm to another. The legacy of the ledger. Venice thrives on records. If the palaces collapse into the lagoon, the records may still float, bound in oilcloth, filed by date and debt. Bartolomeo begins making notes for the instructional manuscript. He writes about coin conversion, weight differentials, the relationship between the grossi and the ducato. He diagrams the correct layout for an inventory page. He lists common errors and how to prevent them. His handwriting is slower now, but clearer. There is no rush. This work is not for the merchant. It is for the craft itself, for those who will one day record debts and shipments as he did. In a final section, he adds a quiet thought. Let the figures be loyal to the truth, even if the hands that write them are forgotten. And he signs it with the same circle and stroke he used in the merchant's ledger all those years. Not a name, but a mark. A final reflection. Some months later, the merchant's business merges with a larger firm. Matteo becomes head clerk. Bartolomeo is not replaced, only forgotten. The counting stones sit unused in a wooden box. The ink dries in its pot. And yet his ledgers remain, each one a silent archive of decisions, trades, and lives moved across sea and land. He is not remembered in guild records or family histories, but his work survives in the balanced books, the resolved debts, the still-standing partnerships. You imagine one of those old ledgers now, stored in a forgotten corner of the Venetian archives. Its cover worn, its spine fragile, but inside clean figures, careful notes, dates and initials, currency values, contracts fulfilled. And you wonder, how many hands built the world by merely counting it, never praised, never known, yet still, without them, nothing would have held. Story 3, Salt and Wind. The year is 123 CE. You are standing at the edge of Ostia Antica, the ancient port city of Rome. The early morning air is filled with salt, not just from the nearby sea, but from the endless shallow pools that stretch across the plain. This is where the salinators, or salt workers, begin their day, not with triumph or speeches, but with shovels, sandals, and the sun. The Roman Empire runs on many things: grain, law, roads, and legions. But beneath it all, beneath the contracts, beneath the ships, beneath the discipline, lies salt. It preserves meat. It balances health. It forms currency. The Latin word salarium, from which we derive salary, once meant the salt allowance paid to soldiers. You are in the midst of this quiet empire. Beneath the empire, the salt pans of Ostia, where brine becomes white crystal, where labor begins before light, and where no name is remembered unless it is chiseled in marble. But the men and women who work here will never have marble. The wind over the pans. A stiff breeze blows from the Tyrrhenian Sea, ruffling the hem of your tunic. The saliny rectangular pools etched into the earth shimmer faintly under the rising sun. Some are full, dark with seawater. Others are dry, glittering with coarse white flakes. These are not natural formations. They are engineered carefully, deliberately, in terrace levels that allow water to flow from one pan to the next. You follow the steps of a worker named Tiberius, though he is no aristocrat. His name was given by his master long ago, when he was still enslaved. He has since earned his manumission, his freedom, but he stays. He knows the salt pans better than the streets of Rome. His feet move without thought. He begins by checking the sluice gates between pans. These wooden barriers, sealed with pitch and packed reeds, control the flow of seawater. Tiberius adjusts them depending on the wind, the tide, and the season. Too much water and the salt will be too wet to harvest. Too little, and it will dry too fast, forming hard crusts that break the tools. He squats, leans into the wind, and watches the surface. There are no clocks here, only sun, shadow, and salt. The process of crystallization. Salt production follows a rhythm as old as the Republic itself. Seawater is drawn into the evaporation pan's shallow pools closest to the shore. The sun does the work here. Over days, the water grows denser. As the brine thickens, it's transferred to concentration pans where the process accelerates. The water turns milky, then green, then gray. Finally, the liquid is moved to crystallization pans, small, rectangular basins, where the salt begins to form a crust on the surface. In dry weather, flakes appear in a single day. The workers monitor the color, taste, and smell of the water to judge when it's ready. Tiberius tastes the brine, spits it out, and nods. The pan is ready. He lifts a wooden rake, curved and worn, and begins to pull salt toward the pan's edge. The motion is slow and heavy. The salt resists. It is wet and dense, like gritty clay. Nearby, a boy gathers the salt into mounds with a short-handled shovel. Each mound must be identical in size, or else the overseer will complain that the weights are wrong. The Romans regulate salt tightly. It is a public good, a resource controlled by the Cura Annani, the grain and salt provisioning authority. Salt is distributed throughout the empire, often in exchange for grain or labor. Some is sent directly to military camps. Some is stored in Ostia's Horia, massive public warehouses with tiled roofs and stone drains. And a portion, of course, is taxed. Salt flows through ledgers and manifests, through contracts and coins. But it all begins here with a rake, a back bent in the sun, and the patience to let wind and time do their work. Daily labor. The workers take no breaks until the 6th hour, roughly midday. They eat bread soaked in vinegar, a food common among laborers and soldiers alike. It's called pasca, and it keeps the body cool. Alongside it, they chew olives or dried figs, often in silence. Tiberius sits with a woman named Claudia, whose forearms are white with salt crust. She is in charge of monitoring the baskets used for transport. The baskets are woven from marsh reeds, lined with linen, and filled by hand. Each basket must carry the correct weight, no more, no less, or the tax record becomes suspect. Claudia checks the scales daily, recalibrated with bronze weights that bear the mark of the Praefectus Annani, the official who oversees provisioning for Rome. They speak little but nod to one another. They have worked side by side for years. Tools of a salinator. Every salinator has a few tools, passed down or remade each year. Wooden rakes for dragging salt. Reed brooms to sweep crystallized flakes. Shovels shaped like paddles. Stone weights to press salt into bricks for storage. Tiberius also carries a personal blade, not for defense, but for scraping salt buildup from the seams of the sluice gates. Salt corrodes everything, even tools. At the edge of the salt fields, stacks of white bricks gleam under the sun. These are compressed salt loaves, dried and shaped for shipment. Each one is marked with a charcoal sign indicating its pan of origin. Some signs are simple letters, others are symbols. Most are meaningless outside the camp, but within the salt workers' world they are everything. A mislabeled brick can lead to accusations of theft or dilution, a serious charge. Salt adulteration is punishable by fine or flogging, in some cases, exile. And so Tiberius checks the marks again. He does not trust the boy who stacked them. He knows that salt, for all its silence, demands perfection. Storage and shipment. As the sun tilts westward, oxen carts arrive. The drivers wear tunics dyed gray with dust. They load the salt bricks with care, each basket tallied and tagged. The shipment is bound for Rome itself, along the Via Salaria, the Salt Road, one of the oldest in the Republic. Salt from Ostia will find its way into kitchens, butcher stalls, temples, and army camps. It is said that soldiers once received salt as pay. This is likely an exaggeration, but the word salarium endures. Even emperors remember their roots in brine. The carts creak as they roll away, bearing with them the day's labor. No one waves goodbye. The end of the day. Tiberius returns to the pans, rinses his hands in seawater, and uses a smooth stone to rub away the salt flakes from his skin. He does this every evening. Without it, his skin would crack and bleed. He watches the sky turn the color of old coins. Claudia is still checking the baskets, even as the light fades. She won't leave until they are stacked correctly. A gull lands nearby, pecking at a salt crystal. The wind returns. The brine ripples. You look across the silent fields glowing faintly white, and you realize this is not a place of spectacle. It is a place of patience, weight, and measure. The empire does not rest on glory, it rests on salt. And you begin to wonder, in the grandeur of Roman history, how many of its foundations lie buried beneath baskets of white, forgotten, wind-blown salt. The sun has barely lifted its weight above the horizon, yet already the salt pans are awake. You hear at first the whisper of water moving through sluice channels, the faint scrape of rakes on stone, and the creak of baskets being lifted by calloused hands. There is no fanfare here, no shouts or orders. The work begins as it always does, slowly, methodically, and with an awareness of wind, sun, and salt that feels more like a ritual than labor. The year is still 123 CE. The reign of Emperor Hadrian brings a rare moment of peace across the Roman world, Pax Romana, but peace does not mean stillness. Rome still feeds its army, runs its courts, and governs its cities. That requires preservation. That requires transport. And above all, that requires salt. Salt, even now, is being weighed and counted by quiet hands beneath the rising sun. Claudia and the scales. Claudia is already at work, crouched beside the stone scale set near the north pan. She's adjusting the balance using standard bronze weights, worn smooth from years of use. Each bears a stamped mark, SPQR Senatus Populusque Romanus, the seal of the Republic that still lingers in the empire. She places a fresh salt brick onto the tray. Its weight is close but not perfect. She frowns. A layer of moisture has crept into the brick, absorbed overnight from the humid coastal air. That extra water could make the shipment's total weight exceed the quota. In a city like Rome, where goods are taxed by weight, a few overmoist bricks could trigger suspicion of tampering. She sets it aside. Salt is money, and money, like salt, must be dry and exact. Claudia is not educated in letters, but her mind tracks mass, rate, and fairness better than most scribes. She's known as a Justa Salinaria, a just salt worker, and her reputation shields her from the overseer's doubts. Today, the shipment is bound for Castra Praetoria, the barracks of the imperial guards in Rome. Salt for soldiers, clean, dry, and properly marked. A mistake here might not just cause loss, it could cause punishment. Salt is currency in law. Salt is more than seasoning. It is a legal and logistical foundation. In this era, the Cura Annani ensures food and essential supplies for the city of Rome. It is not charity, it is stability. Bread and salt are the twin pillars of urban peace. Shortages lead to unrest. Unrest leads to insurrection. Because of this, the state maintains strict records of all salt production and movement. Each pan is registered. Each worker is known. Each shipment is documented in wax tablets carried by the cart drivers, a list of origins, weight, destination, and date. Tiberius has been called to the overseer's hut, a low building near the road. The overseer is a freedman like him, but one with tighter sandals and an official seal ring. Inside, Tiberius kneels before a table where wooden styluses rest beside tablets coated with dark wax. The overseer reads aloud the previous week's totals. There's a discrepancy, 4 bricks less than expected. Tiberius says nothing at first. He's already calculated the shortfall in his head. Rainfall last week flooded one of the evaporation pans, delaying the transfer. He says so plainly. The overseer grunts, records the excuse, and waves him away. No reward, no punishment, just acknowledgement. In the salt trade, even honesty is weighed. The tools of preservation. In the nearby salarium depot, other workers prepare preserved goods for shipment. Fish from Hispania are rubbed with fresh salt. Meats are packed into clay jars, each layer separated by white flakes. Salted olives, vinegar pickles, and even cheese wheels, all preserved under a careful hand. Without salt, the city would rot. Romans understood preservation not just as a luxury, but as necessity. They taxed salt accordingly, assigning tariffs based on origin, purity, and intended use. Medical salt, used in ointments and purgatives, received higher scrutiny. Bathing salts, sometimes mixed with herbs or perfumes, were reserved for the wealthy. But the salt of Ostia is working salt. Rough, unfiltered, harvested in bulk. It carries no scent but the sea and no value but weight. And yet it is everywhere. A day in the wind. By the 6th hour the sun is high. The salt fields shimmer like crushed marble. Workers tie cloths over their heads. The light reflects upward, blinding. Tiberius walks along the rim of the highest pan, checking for cracks in the clay linings. Every pan must be watertight. Leaks mean loss. Loss means suspicion. He carries a wooden trowel, a pouch of clay mixed with animal fat, and a thin reed stylus for scratching date marks into the gate posts. Every repair is noted. In the distance, a group of newer workers, mostly young men recently purchased or hired, struggle with a jammed sluice. Claudia watches from afar but does not intervene. They must learn the hard way. Tiberius, however, walks over. Without a word, he uses his weight to shift the beam. The sluice opens with a heavy groan, water gushing in a controlled stream. He says nothing. They nod, embarrassed. Salt teaches humility faster than any overseer. The forgotten class. Salt workers are never praised in poems. They are not gladiators, not senators, not orators. Their names are rarely carved. Their tombstones, if they can afford one, are simple, often shared with family or fellow workers. But they are known to each other. Within the Saloni, hierarchy exists. Senior workers receive first pick of tools. Trusted ones weigh shipments. Old hands like Claudia are consulted before gates are opened or shipments sealed. There is a quiet dignity here, a recognition that while their work is coarse, it is necessary. Tiberius once saw a marble statue of a general in the Forum, draped in salt-stiffened cloth, arms lifted in bronze glory. He had walked past without stopping. Later that night, he rubbed salt from his cracked knuckles and wondered if the general had ever tasted the sun-baked bitterness of Ostia's fields. Probably not. Storage and the sea. At the edge of the salt pans lies the horium, the salt warehouse. Inside, bricks are stacked with care. Each has been dried, pressed, weighed, marked. Some will stay for months, others will be gone by morning. A scribe sits at a small table, recording each outgoing batch. He does not look up. He speaks only to confirm names and tallies. Claudia arrives with a cart. She lays her hand on the topmost brick and recites the origin pan number, the batch day, and the worker's initials. The scribe nods, scratches the wax tablet, wipes his stylus. Done. No thanks, no praise, no smile. Just recorded. Salt does not celebrate itself, it simply preserves. And as the day draws to a close, you begin to see it more clearly how this field of white, wind-blown crystals holds together the vastness of empire with nothing but evaporation and discipline. You watch the sky turn pale gold, and you wonder. In a civilization famed for triumphs and tragedies, why do we forget the fields that preserved it all from decay? The wind shifts direction in the night. It does this without notice, without permission, stirring the shallow brine pools just enough to alter tomorrow's yield. When morning comes, the salt pans shimmer beneath a sky the color of old marble. The gulls cry once, then disappear. The air is still. The work does not stop. It never has. A visitor from Rome. Late in the morning, a cart arrives from the city. Two men descend, their sandals too clean, their tunics trimmed with wool thread. One carries a tablet case of polished wood. The other wears a ring with a bronze signet shaped like a sheaf of wheat, the mark of the Anony office. They are here for inspection. The workers take no notice at first. They have seen such men before. They walk differently, like people whose hands have never been inside a salt basket, but everyone stands a little straighter. The piles are neatened, the baskets wiped clean. Claudia approaches them first. She offers the weekly tallies, sealed in wax and bound in linen thread. She points to the storage lot, the drying area, the calibrated scale stones. Her voice is calm, factual. The inspectors murmur. They lift one salt brick, then another. They test for moisture by tapping the sides, scraping it with a fingernail. They speak in half-tones, phrases like sufficient purity or acceptable yield. Tiberius watches, not with fear but with a tired understanding. These men are part of the system that governs the salt trade, necessary but temporary. Their words will fade. The salt will remain. The inspectors leave without ceremony. A tablet is updated, a mark is made. No one is praised, no one is punished. This, too, is part of the salt's rhythm. Death and dedication. Later that week, one of the older workers dies. His name was Lucius. He had worked the pans since before Tiberius earned his manumission. His knees were bad, his fingers twisted, but his mind remained sharp, and his memory of rainfall patterns was unmatched. He had predicted the last flood to within a single day. There is no funeral, not in the traditional sense. Salt workers do not take much time for mourning. They gather near the sluice gate he favored, pour a small heap of white crystals into the water, and speak his name once. Claudia places a reed broom nearby, tied with red thread. No one records his death officially. There is no temple inscription, no mosaic, no statue. But in the records of the overseer, someone quietly etches L beside his last tally entry, just a letter, a sign that he was known, a sign that he worked. Tiberius walks the pans the next day, retracing Lucius's old route. He sees the salt glinting under the new light. The crystals shine, indifferent. Salt remembers by staying. The edge of the empire. The salt bricks loaded today will not go to Rome. They are bound for Lugdunum in the province of Gallia. A long journey by cart, then by ship, then overland again. Salt from Ostia will preserve boar meat in the forests of Gaul. It will be traded in leather sacks by merchants who speak Latin with a Celtic accent. Salt moves farther than the men who harvest it. Tiberius will never leave Ostia. He doesn't wish to. But his work, his daily labor, travels farther than most soldiers. A basket of white flakes may feed a senator's table or sit beside a general's tent. It may be spilled in a temple offering or rubbed into a wound on a distant battlefield. There is no pride in this, only continuity. Salt is humble, but it touches everything. The legacy of wind and grain. The salinators will not be remembered in Rome's triumphal arches. Their names will not be recited by poets. But they have rituals. At season's end, the pans are drained, swept, and sealed. Salt tools are washed with vinegar, dried, and stored in clay jars. Workers share fermented fish sauce and bread, and recall whose pans yielded best. Tiberius sharpens his rake. Claudia reweaves the lining of the measuring basket. The cycle begins again. Outside the pans, life moves on temples rise, senators argue, roads stretch ever outward. But inside this white world, the wind always returns, the water always recedes, and the salt always comes back. It is never fast, never glorious. Just certain. A quiet monument. Years later, perhaps decades, someone will find a salt rake buried in the soil near Ostia. Its handle worn, its teeth eaten away by time. It will be catalogued, measured, placed in a museum. A small plaque will read, Salt rake, Roman Empire ca. 2nd century CE, used in the production of sea salt at Ostia Antiqua. Nothing more. No name, no story. But now you know who held it. Now you know what it meant. Now you can imagine the hands, the sun, the wind, and the silent language of crystal and time. And so you may ask yourself, as the last cart disappears down the Via Salaria, how many empires rested not on conquest, but on quiet piles of white salt lifted, measured, and carried by hands history never named. Story 4. The Looms of Bruges. Bruges, circa 1360 CA. The bells of the Church of Our Lady toll softly through the morning mist. They are not loud, the air here is thick with damp, and the sound drifts more than it rings. Still, the tone is enough. In the weaving houses tucked behind the canals and narrow streets of Groningen, work begins. You are inside a weaver's hall, not grand, not gilded. The air smells of wool grease, wood smoke, and a faint bitterness from last night's beer. This is the daily world of Matthias, a master wool weaver registered with the Drapeniersgilde, the powerful Bruges Cloth Guild. He is not noble but not poor, somewhere in between, like most of Bruges. The room is small but orderly. A large wooden loom stands in the center, silent for now. Along the walls, bundles of dyed wool are stacked deep blue, ochre, faded red. The colors are not vivid. That is by design. Vivid dyes cost more, and this cloth is bound for Ghent merchants, not kings. Matthias lights a small oil lamp and begins checking the loom's tension. The weaving won't start until the third bell, but preparation is half the craft. He works alone for now. The architecture of cloth. The loom is a horizontal treadle loom, common in northern Europe since the 12th century. It is made of local beechwood, its surface smoothed from years of oil and pressure. Its parts carry quiet names. Warp beam, where the long vertical threads are stretched. Heddle, small loops that raise and lower warp threads. Shuttle, a small boat-shaped tool that carries the weft. Reed, a comb-like frame to beat the weft tight. Matthias speaks softly to himself as he lifts each piece, checking for wear or warp. A misaligned heddle can ruin days of work. A frayed warp thread can snap at the worst moment. He knots a broken string with practiced fingers. There is no music, only the creak of wood and the soft brushing of wool. His wife, Anke, enters carrying a pot of rye porridge. She sets it on a stool and checks the dye baskets not with curiosity but calculation. Dyes fade. She inventories them by scent and hue. The room is still gray. The loom has not yet begun, but you can already feel the city moving through it. The guild above all. In Bruges, the guild is more than a trade association. It is a form of government, a society, a survival structure. The Drapeniersgilde regulates every step of cloth production, from the sourcing of wool to the dyeing process to the final inspection and stamping. Matthias is a registered master. He owns his loom. He has the right to hire journeymen and train apprentices, but with that comes obligation. Each week, the guild sends an inspector to check the weight, size, and consistency of the cloth produced. Each bolt must be measured precisely 24 Flemish ells in length, about 27 meters, and folded in regulation style. Any deviation, and the cloth is rejected. Rejected cloth is shameful. It may be sold at a loss, or worse, publicly burned. Matthias has never had a bolt rejected, not because he is brilliant, but because he is careful, and because he takes no pride in speed. The weaver's rhythm, he says, is set not by ambition but by thread tension. He eats his porridge slowly, watching the warp threads in the dim light. The work begins. By the third bell, his apprentice arrives, a boy of about 14 named Lucas, whose hands are still too soft and whose feet are too loud. But he's learning. Together, they check the warp, adjusting the threads to sit evenly between the heddles. Lucas retrieves the shuttle, checking that the bobbin of wool is spun tight. It is. Matthias places his foot on the treadle, presses gently, and the loom comes to life. Click. Slide. Beat. The rhythm is soft and steady. The treadle lowers a group of warp threads. The shuttle glides through the opening. The reed pushes the weft into place, then again and again. The noise is not loud, more like breathing or water on a roof. Wooden tools striking wood, softened by wool and air. They speak little. Cloth does not like chatter. Errors come from distraction. You can see how the process stretches not just across hours but generations. Matthias learned from his father. Lucas learns from Matthias. Each thread laid down in the same pattern: warp, weft, patience. Wool from across the sea. The wool used here is English broadcloth, imported from Suffolk. It arrives in bales, greasy and unwashed, packed tight with straw. Before weaving, it must be cleaned, carded, spun, and dyed. Each task is handled by different guilds. The fullers, who clean and thicken the wool. The dyers, who boil it in vats of madder, wode or weld. The spinners, who twist it into yarn on slow wheels. Only then does it reach Matthias. His cloth is not decorative. It is for coats, cloaks, and hoods, sturdy, weather-resistant, meant to be worn by traders, guardsmen, and monks. Each bolt is worth weeks of labor, but it is not luxury. It is infrastructure, a fabric of society, quite literally. And if one thread slips, the whole bolt may pucker, or worse, fail inspection. Matthias glances up at the sun through the smoke hole. He is satisfied. The warp tension holds. The weaving continues. The afternoon stiffness. By the seventh bell, their legs ache. The treadle press is constant. Even with shifts between master and apprentice, the motion grinds into the knees and hips. Ank returns with sour bread and buttermilk. They eat in silence, and Matthias soaks a cloth in vinegar to clean his hands. Wool leaves an invisible residue, a stickiness that never quite washes away. In the corner, a basket of finished bolts waits for stamping. Tomorrow, the guild inspector will arrive. Matthias is not nervous, but he has never relaxed the day before inspection. He will stay up late, candle in hand, checking for skipped threads. He does not trust memory. He trusts weight and light and grain. Lucas will be sent home early. Matthias prefers solitude when preparing the final press. As the light fades and the loom falls silent for the day, you can see the woven cloth spread across the work table, tight, even, and slightly rough. He runs his hand across it once. No words, just the feel of finished work. And you wonder, as you watch the oil lamp flicker across the loom, how much of history was shaped not by kings or battles, but by threads pulled quietly through frames over and over, for a lifetime. The morning is overcast, as most mornings in Bruges are. The rain doesn't fall, but hovers a mist that softens the corners of stone walls and dulls the edges of sound. Inside Matthias's weaving room, however, the air is dry and still. That is important. Dampness weakens the threads. Humidity makes the cloth too soft to check properly. Today is inspection day. The loom sits untouched in the center of the room, draped with a linen cloth. Matthias will not weave this morning. Instead, he prepares for the guild official, who is due before midday. On the table, 4 bolts of finished wool, each tightly rolled, each the exact width and length required, each with its ends trimmed and pressed with wooden paddles. They are not beautiful, but they are even, clean, honest. Matthias straightens the cloth edges again, not because they need it, because it is habit, because it is ritual. Because cloth, like reputation, is not improved by haste. The inspector arrives. The inspector does not knock. He enters quietly, his boots wet, his coat marked with the red and white badge of the Drapenersgilde. He is older but not kind. His face has the worn blankness of someone who has looked at too much cloth in his life. Matthias nods, says nothing, speaking out of turn is discouraged. The inspector sets down a wooden case. Inside, a measuring rod, 1 Flemish ell in length. A gilt stamp carved from hardwood. A small scale for checking weight. A leather-bound book for notes. A blade for slicing test samples. He begins the process. The measuring rod passes over each bolt 3 times, once for length, once for width, once diagonally to check warp tension. He presses a thumb against the weave, counting threads per inch. Too loose and the cloth will fail under dyeing. Too tight and it will tear unevenly. Matthias watches without expression. The inspector lifts 1 bolt, snips a square from its end, and folds it into a pouch. This will go to the Dyers Guild for testing. Random checks ensure that masters are not mixing inferior weft or cutting corners on fulling. Then comes the stamp. 1 by 1, the approved bolts are pressed with a guild seal, a small rectangle imprinted with a star, and a pair of shears. The seal is both guarantee and advertisement. It allows the cloth to be traded legally in the Bruges markets and abroad. The inspector signs the logbook and departs without a word. Matthias breathes again. All 4 bolts approved. Cloth is power. Cloth is currency in Flanders, not coins, not promises. Cloth. Bruges, Ghent, and Ypres form the textile triangle that fuels trade from England to Italy. Even Venetian merchants come to Flanders for wool cloth. In return, they bring silks, spices, and glass. The entire city operates around textile timing. Spring, when English wool arrives. Summer, best for drying dyed threads. Autumn, merchants arrive for the great Bruges fair. Winter, looms slow, but inspections continue. Matthias doesn't think of trade routes, but he knows the rhythm of delivery carts, the thickness of wool by batch, and the price of dye by ounce. His cloth may end up in a merchant's robe in Cologne, or sewn into a bishop's cloak in Cambrai, or lined into a soldier's hood in Liege. He will never see these places. He doesn't need to. The cloth travels, his name does not. That's how it has always been. The apprentice's mistake. Lucas arrives late that afternoon, nervous. He's brought a new batch of spun yarn from the dyers, but it's uneven. The tension varies. The dye isn't set properly in a few skeins. Matthias examines it quietly. No anger, just instruction. He picks up a length, holds it to the light, twists it. Then he tears off the bad portion and hands Lucas the good half. Wind it, he says, twice, not once. Lucas nods. He will learn. Apprentices are not expected to be flawless, but they are expected to watch. Weaving isn't taught. It's absorbed through repetition, pressure, patience. For the rest of the day, Lucas spins silently while Matthias weaves. The loom moves in rhythm again, treadle, shuttle, beat. The sound is the same, only the thread has changed. A record without names. Each stamped bolt is recorded in the guild registry, but not under Matthias's name. Instead, it is logged by his mark, a small woven square of blue and white, sewn into the cloth's underside. It is enough for the guild to identify if needed. But to merchants, it's invisible. There are no maker's signatures in this trade, no labels, no artist's initials, just thread count, seal, and length. The value lies in trust, not recognition. That's the weaver's world, precision without credit. Matthias doesn't mind. He finds comfort in it. At dusk, he sits beside the hearth and oils the loom's joints with a rag soaked in boiled linseed. It squeaks less now. In the corner, Lucas practices warping a small frame. The strands are uneven but close. Ank mends an old linen shift by the light of a single candle. And the city outside dims into silence. The unseen city. Bruges is known for its spires, markets, and guild halls. But beneath all of it, beneath the merchant contracts, beneath the prayers, beneath the songs of traveling minstrels lies the cloth. It hangs in every home, it lines every chest, it covers every table. And yet no one asks who made it. But now you've seen the hands, felt the rhythm, heard the creak of the loom in the dark morning hours. And perhaps you begin to ask, how much of the past was threaded into silence, pulled taut between wood and will and left behind, not to be remembered but to be worn. The air is colder now. The smell of wood smoke lingers longer in the mornings, and the cloth takes more time to dry after pressing. Autumn has settled over Bruges, and with it comes the long stretch of preparation not for feast or festival, but for the season of inward work, when light fades early and patience grows long. Matthias still rises before dawn. He lights the fire with slow hands, feeding the stove with kindling and damp scraps of wool too short to be useful. The room smells like scorched lanolin and warm ash. Lucas has improved. His warp work no longer sags, and his winding technique now produces skeins that unravel without tangling. He watches the loom not just with curiosity but with caution. He is becoming a weaver. Matthias doesn't say this aloud. He only lets Lucas sit at the loom today for the first time while he watches from the corner with a cloth of raw linen in his hands, slowly knotting a tear in the edge. No praise, no celebration. Just the sound of the treadle, the flick of the shuttle, the soft thunk of the reed pressing the weft into place. The room hums. Markets and margins. Outside, the city readies itself for the Bruges autumn market. Merchants from as far as Lübeck, Florence, and London will arrive, bearing silver, wine, pepper, and bolts of silk. Matthias will not go. The guild sells his cloth directly through the hall system, large, vaulted halls where certified bolts are inspected and sold in lots. Cloth is priced by type and weight, not by the name of the weaver, and even the best cloth is often bundled together fine with average to balance out losses. The merchant gets the glory of the sale. The weaver gets the promise of the next order. Matthias receives word that one of his bolts has been purchased by a Venetian trader. It will be carried south by ship, through the canals, then onto the Rhone and down into northern Italy, where it may be cut and stitched into clerical robes. He doesn't smile at the news, but he does press a new bolt just a little tighter today. The hidden knowledge. You begin to notice how much a weaver knows that cannot be written. Matthias can tell the age of wool by its smell after boiling. He can feel dye strength by the texture it leaves on his fingertips. He can judge the weather by the creak of the reed dry on sunny days, slow on wet mornings. These are things not found in books. And if Lucas forgets one day to oil the heddle strings, Matthias does not scold him, only rewinds the warp threads with a sigh. The lesson is in the repetition. The learning is in the doing. This is craft, not commerce. Repetition until fluency, fluency until instinct. Nothing glamorous, everything necessary. Threads of family. Ank still manages the dye pots. She no longer handles the heavy wool baskets, but she keeps the dye journal's small parchment pages stitched together with flax thread, filled with scribbled records of hue, date, and water temperature. She has her own system of marks, a crescent for weak color, a slash for overcooked dye, a dot for perfect tone. She teaches Lucas to read her notations. They speak more now. Lucas asks questions. Ank answers with gestures and half smiles. There is a rhythm in the room that wasn't there before. It hums beneath the sound of the loom. Matthias notices, but says nothing. The last loom. At the end of the month, the guild announces a loom registration review. All master weavers must declare their equipment, apprentices, and production counts. It is an administrative task, but a crucial one. Looms not registered can be confiscated. Production not reported may be fined. Apprentices must be listed and certified by their masters. If Lucas is to continue and eventually seek journeyman status, Matthias must sign his name to it. He does, and for the first time, writes beside his own mark. Lucas, apprentice, year 2, warp and weft instruction begun. The clerk at the guild hall barely glances at the sheet. But Matthias watches as the name is copied into the registry. Another thread added to the long tapestry of weavers whose names will not be sung, but whose fingers shaped cities. Worn but whole. Winter begins its whisper. The morning frost clings to the window panes. Cloth dries slower. Light fades faster. Matthias's back aches more now. He weaves less, instructs more. Lucas takes over the loom 2 days a week. His pace is slower but steady. He checks each thread 3 times before pressing the treadle. Matthias watches from his chair, sharpening tools and boiling glue for the loom's joints. Ink marks another dye journal full. She begins a new one. Their work continues. The world outside changes, kings rise, wars threaten, coins shift value. But inside the weaver's hall, the threads pull taut, the shuttle glides and the cloth grows longer. Not for fame, not for legacy. For warmth, for structure, for living. A final reflection. You stand quietly now in this room of thread and time, listening to the loom hum beneath candlelight. You think of all the cloth that passed through this city, cloaks worn by merchants, banners raised in cathedrals, gowns worn once and forgotten. And yet the thread endures. It does not demand to be seen. Only used. Only trusted. And you may wonder, what if the strongest parts of history are not the stories told, but the quiet work that made the telling possible, thread by thread, stitch by stitch, behind every page, banner, and robe? Story 5. Under the Shadow of the Pagoda. Chang'an, circa 742 CE, the height of the Tang dynasty. The city is immense. Its avenues are measured in li, its gates flanked by guards in feathered armor, and its marketplaces bustle with Persian, Sogdian, Korean, and Indian tongues. Here, beneath the tiled eaves and dragon-headed corners of Great Wild Goose Pagoda, silence waits. In a quiet hall behind the temple proper, beside a narrow courtyard filled with stone lanterns and a single gnarled pine, the morning begins not with a bell or a chant, but with the soft brush of silk cloth against wood and the sigh of boiling glue. You are in a scriptorium, a writing workshop of the Buddhist monastery, and in this place, ink is sacred. A young temple servant, Yun, kneels beside the writing desk. He is not a monk, though his head is shaved and his robes are plain. He is a copier, a transcriber of sutras. His task is not prayer but preservation. He does not interpret the Dharma. He prepares the scroll on which it is written. In the Tang dynasty, scrolls are not printed, not yet, not here. Every sacred sutra is copied by hand, with the expectation of clarity, balance, and reverence. The act itself is part of the offering. And so Yun begins his day by preparing the page. Paper, silk, and size. The scroll is not made of rice paper as many assume, but of Xuan paper, a fine mulberry-based sheet made to hold ink without bleeding. It is soft but strong, light but patient. Before Yun can write, the paper must be sized with a thin animal glue, brushed across its surface and left to dry. This keeps the ink from soaking too deeply, allowing for fine strokes and graceful curves. Today, the sizing is already done. Yun takes a dry cotton cloth, smooths the surface of the sheet, and places it carefully on a lacquered writing board. Above him, sunlight filters through wooden slats, dust catching in the still air. You might notice that no one speaks here, not because it is forbidden, but because silence allows for steadiness. Beside Yun's elbow is a porcelain inkstone, a block of black pigment ground into water. He uses a small pestle, turning slowly until the mixture darkens to the consistency of warm syrup. Then he dips his brush made of rabbit hair, bound in bamboo, and tests a stroke on scrap paper, a single horizontal line. It must be fluid, consistent, unbroken. Only then does he begin. The characters of the sutra. Today's scroll is a section from the Lotus Sutra. Yun is copying from an older manuscript stored in the scroll chest, tied in red silk. He lays it open beside him, weighted with polished stones. Each line must follow a vertical column, 17 characters tall, perfectly aligned. He begins at the top right, working downward, one column at a time. The strokes are not rushed. Each character takes between 3 and 7 seconds. In an hour, he may complete 30 to 50 characters. Mistakes are rare, but when they happen, they are scraped away with a thin bone knife, the surface resized, and the character rewritten. If the error is too deep, the sheet is discarded. Some say that to copy the sutras is to copy not just words, but merit. And indeed, this is why wealthy patrons sometimes donate paper, ink, or even commission full sutras to be copied and stored within temple libraries, or sealed inside statues. The scroll Yun works on today is destined for a monastic crypt in the hills near Luoyang. It may never be read again. But that doesn't change his focus. Sacred or not, every line must be right. The tools of the temple scribe. Yun's tools are humble but refined. Brushes of different thicknesses, some stiff, others soft. Ink cakes, each pressed with the image of a bodhisattva. Burnishing stones to smooth the paper edges. A jade weight shaped like a dragon, used to hold the scroll flat. A brush rest carved from bamboo. He keeps them all in a lacquered box, wrapped in linen, oiled regularly to prevent cracking. There is no need for abundance, only reliability. Some scribes keep their own brush recipes, mixing rabbit, goat, and wolf hairs in secret proportions to achieve the ideal softness. Yun does not have this knowledge yet, but he dreams of it. You notice how carefully he holds his wrist off the paper, how he breathes with the rhythm of each stroke, how his eyes flick between the reference scroll and the blank one, never hurried, never idle. This is not calligraphy for display. This is transmission. Shadows in the pagoda. Above the scriptorium, the towering Great Wild Goose Pagoda looms 7 stories of stone and timber, holding relics from Xuanzang's pilgrimage to India. His journey brought back over 600 Buddhist texts, many of which are still being translated by monks in the adjoining wing. You might hear the faint sounds of chanting from the hall next door, rhythmic, low, almost like breathing. Yun pauses to rest his hand. He unrolls the completed section and checks it for consistency. He will write no more than 2 full sheets today. Each scroll, when joined, may be dozens of meters long. It could take weeks or months to complete a full sutra, not including decoration, colophon, and final wrapping. Still, he works. Because to copy the Dharma is to enter into the continuity of its preservation silently, invisibly. The end of the day. As the light fades, Yun cleans his brush, wipes the inkstone, and rolls the partially completed scroll into a narrow cylinder. He ties it with silk cord and places it gently into a cubby within the wall. Each slot holds a different work in progress. There is no signature, no mark of authorship. Only a note in pencil on the edge of the wrapper. Scroll 12, Lotus, sections 13-14. A monk passes through the hall and bows. Yun returns the gesture. Outside, lanterns flicker along the stone path leading through the temple garden. Somewhere, wind moves through pine needles. A bell chimes softly in the distance. Yun lights a small oil lamp and begins sharpening his brush tips, plucking loose hairs, trimming the ends, smoothing the shaft with his sleeve. He does this every night. You watch as the flame casts shadows against the pale wall behind him, brush, inkstone, hand, and scroll. And you wonder, how many voices have survived because one hand, one brush, One breath chose to preserve them not with volume, but with silence. It is now mid-autumn in Chang'an. The ginkgo trees along the temple paths have begun to turn gold. Their fan-shaped leaves flutter down like slow-moving feathers, littering the walkways with quiet reminders of passing time. Yun sweeps them each morning before returning to his scroll work, another daily rhythm within the temple's thousand-year pulse. The scroll he began 3 weeks ago is nearing completion. 26 sheets so far, each sewn edge to edge with silk backing, forming a growing ribbon of text that now stretches across half the length of the scriptorium table. But today is not a day for writing. Today is for correction, collation, and colophon. Yun kneels beside the scroll, unrolling it slowly. Each sheet reveals hours of silent work, a symphony of inked characters, not a line out of place, not a brush stroke fading, but even perfection must be reviewed. The master of the sutras. The scroll master, a senior monk named Venerable Zuman, arrives just after second bell. He is thin, gray-bearded with ink stains on his thumbs. He has copied over 200 complete sutras in his lifetime. He does not speak unless necessary. He inspects. As Yun unfurls the scroll, Zuman bends low, using a small bronze mirror to reflect light onto the page. He traces each column with his finger, not touching, just pointing his eyes, searching for inconsistencies in form, spacing, and radical placement. When he finds a slight tail too long on the character Chinese letter CI, compassion, he gestures. Yun nods. He marks it with a thin red circle. But there are few such marks. Zuman gives a final bow and departs. Approval has been granted. Yun exhales. The colophon, a signature without a name. Every sutra must end with a colophon, a note at the end of the scroll stating the source text, the temple in which it was copied, and the intention of the work. Not the name of the scribe. Instead, the colophon will read, "This scroll was faithfully copied at the Great Wild Goose Pagoda, under the guidance of the Chan monastic community, in the autumn of the Tianbao era, by one seeking merit through preservation of the Dharma." This is Yun's legacy, anonymity wrapped in service. You might ask why he does not write his name. But in this world, ego is dust. The preservation of the Buddha's word, that is the only name that endures. The binding ritual. Yun completes the final characters with care, adding the temple's official seal in red cinnabar ink. Then he rolls the full scroll, now nearly 10 meters long, around a jade core rod, reserved for sacred texts. The scroll is wrapped in cloud-patterned silk, tied with crimson cord, and placed into a lacquered case, its surface painted with lotus blossoms and guardian lions. Before it can be moved to the crypt in Luoyang, it must pass ritual blessing by the abbot and the library keeper. But first, Yun carries it to the hall of storage, a long, dim room filled with scrolls laid like timber along recessed wall shelves. He places his offering beside others, a narrow part in a wide sea of voices. The room smells of glue, wood, and old silk. And stillness. You may feel in that moment the immense weight of transmission, how knowledge does not thunder forward, but trickles through fingers like ink through brush, silent and slow. Of ink and ingredients. Yun returns to the workshop and begins preparing a new batch of ink. This ink will be different, not black but blue-black, a hue used for special invocations and dedications. The pigment is made from indigo, pine soot, and finely crushed azurite, bound in glue and aged for weeks before grinding. Ink making is its own form of sutra. He mixes the ingredients slowly, adding drops of rose water to keep the blend smooth. The scent is faint but floral. The new scroll will be a copy of the Vimalakirti Sutra, shorter, more philosophical, and intended as a gift to a lay donor, a wealthy silk merchant's widow seeking to sponsor her late husband's passage through the cycle of rebirth. You realize here that not all scrolls are copied from monks or temple crypts. Some are donated as offerings, part of the intricate network of patronage that funds the temple's daily operations. Others are copied as vows by those seeking healing, absolution, or future favor. But all are treated the same in the eyes of the Dharma. There is no less important scroll, only less visible ones. A visit from the artist. The scriptorium is shared at times, with illuminators, those who add painted borders, miniature Buddhas, and symbolic flourishes to finished scrolls. This afternoon, a young artist named Li Hua enters with her case of pigments. She is not ordained, but works for the temple by commission. Her hands are stained with red and gold. She paints with squirrel hair brushes so fine they can detail the wings of a fly. She and Yun do not speak much, but they nod to one another, a small bow of shared craft. Yun places the newly sealed scroll on a padded tray. Li Hua will spend the next 3 days adding illustrations at the beginning and end, gold filigree patterns, a painting of the Bodhisattva Manjusri, and possibly a stylized lion scroll holder, if the donor's contribution allows. You might expect grandeur, but the images are never meant to distract from the text. They serve it. Li Hua paints in silence, her face calm. Occasionally she hums. Yun sharpens his brush tips in the corner, working in rhythm to her strokes. In the quiet, the two crafts merge. Ink and image, form and color, voice and silence. A pause in the wind. Evening falls. A gust of wind rattles the paper windows. The pine outside shakes loose another layer of yellow leaves. Yun walks through the corridor to light the evening lanterns, stopping to sweep the stone steps where the leaves have gathered. He pauses. Above him, the pagoda rises into the darkening sky, its brickwork stained by centuries of rain and incense smoke. Inside, a chamber holds the Buddha's relic, a single bone, said to be from the finger of the Enlightened One himself. Yun bows. He has never seen the relic. He likely never will. But that changes nothing. The Dharma is not in the relic, he thinks. It is in the copying, the patience, the clarity. The slow transmission of breath into character, brush into line, scroll into memory. He returns to the scriptorium and begins preparing his next sheet. Tomorrow the ink will be ready, and with it a new page. But now you may wonder, how much of our civilization has survived not through conquest or voice, but by the quiet repetition of nameless scribes, shaping letters in silence under the shadow of temples and time. The year turns. Snow visits Chang'an softly, settling on rooftops and lantern poles, dusting the branches of cypress trees like powdered bone. The world becomes stiller, as though the city itself holds its breath. Inside the temple, the scriptorium remains warm, a pocket of fire-heated calm in a cold world. The scent of glue and ink still hangs in the air. The hum of brushwork continues. Yun sits as always, cross-legged beside the writing desk. Before him is not a sutra but a scroll box made of cypress wood. It is plain, simple, sanded smooth. Inside lies the Vimalakirti Sutra, now fully copied and illustrated. He ties the scroll in a silk wrapping, folds the cloth over itself in 3 parts, a symbolic gesture of respect, and places it in the box with care. Then he reaches for a slender slip of paper and a red wax seal. On it he writes the name of the donor's late husband, followed by a short invocation. May his spirit find peace, and may this offering serve as a bridge between lifetimes. He does not sign his name. No scribe ever does. He seals the box and places it on the temple's offering table. It will be collected before dusk. The scribe's apprenticeship ends. Yun is no longer the newest scribe. 2 weeks ago, a younger boy from the countryside joined the scriptorium. His name is Wei. He is clumsy, quiet, always covered in ink. Yun remembers what that felt like. Today, he shows Wei how to mix glue sizing properly. He explains how long to soak the brushes, how to keep the tips sharp, how to test the paper tension with a whisper of breath. Wei listens without speaking. Yun doesn't mind. He teaches through action as he was taught. When Wei drops a jar of indigo pigment, Yun doesn't flinch. He fetches the cloth, helps clean the floor, and grinds a new batch. This, too, is part of the transmission. Brush to brush, hand to hand, patience across generations. A visit from the donor. Just before the new moon, the donor herself arrives. Her name is Madame Li, a widow perhaps in her late 40s, dressed plainly in gray silk, a strand of white hair escaping her headdress. She bows deeply to the abbot, then approaches the offering table. She does not touch the box. She only gazes at it for a long time, her hands folded, her face unreadable. Yun watches from the corridor. She turns to the monk and asks if she may see the scroll. The request is unusual. Most donors never ask. The abbot agrees. They unseal the box, lay out the scroll. She kneels to read the first few lines. Her lips move silently, tracing the familiar words. A moment later, her eyes glisten. She bows again and says nothing more. The scroll is resealed, delivered to her with reverence. She takes it home, where it will be placed on her ancestral altar, not to be read, but to exist as merit, as offering, as continuity. Yun never sees the scroll again. But he remembers it. Every character, every line. Gone but carried. A change in the wind. One morning, a caravan arrives from Luoyang, bearing relics and scrolls for exchange. The visiting monks bring news. New printing presses are being developed in the south, using woodblocks to reproduce texts at faster rates. Some worry this will end the tradition of hand-copied scrolls. Yun is not among them. He knows the temple will always need scribes. Not just to copy, but to repair, to curate, to instruct. He also knows that the merit lies not in the ink, but in the intent. Let others carve woodblocks. Let books spread faster. Let knowledge multiply. But here, in this corner of silence, scrolls will still begin with a brush dipped in silence. Yun begins training Wei in full column copying. The cycle continues. Reflections in dust. One night, long after the lanterns have dimmed and the garden has gone quiet, Yun stays behind in the scriptorium. He lights a single lamp and opens the temple's oldest scroll, a crumbling copy of the Heart Sutra, ink faded to brown, paper yellowed and torn. It was copied by a scribe no one remembers. No colophon, no donor. But the characters still hold. He reads them aloud quietly. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. The air feels heavier with memory. He closes the scroll, wraps it again. And suddenly you understand. These texts were never meant to be owned, only held. Not monuments, but lanterns. Briefly lit, passed on, then extinguished. Each scribe a keeper of flame for a little while. Each scroll a whisper, not a shout. And perhaps you wonder, how many souls throughout time labored in silence, content to leave no name, only ink, and trusted that their quiet offerings would ripple forward, beyond memory, beyond sight. Story 6. The Salt Keepers of Saloni. The year is 158 CE. The place, Saloni, a Roman saltworks located along the river Severn in what is now modern-day Cheshire, Britain. You are far from the grandeur of Rome. There are no forums here, no marble columns or triumphal processions. Only wind, mud, and salt. Salt, or sal, as the Romans call it, is no luxury. It is a necessity. It preserves meat, disinfects wounds, seasons otherwise bland gruel, and forms the backbone of trade routes stretching from the Sahara to the Baltic. Roman soldiers are sometimes paid a stipend known as a salarium, which takes its name from salt. And here, in the gray morning fog of Britannia, you stand at the very source of this empire-spanning commodity. The site Saloni. Saloni is not a town in the way Rome is a city. It is a work site, a mixture of industrial camp, rural outpost, and military depot. The land here bubbles with brine springs, natural pools where subterranean salt dissolves into water. The Romans discovered them decades ago and quickly claimed the area. Now the saltworks sprawl across the low, marshy plain in a patchwork of wooden troughs, stone tanks, and evaporation sheds. A low wall surrounds the main compound, guarded not by legionaries, but by auxiliary troops, mostly retired veterans, often of Gallic or Germanic origin, given small plots of land nearby in exchange for continued service. At the center of it all is the boiling hall, where the brine is reduced into crystals and where your journey begins. The salt burner's morning. Your guide is an older man named Gaius Lentulus, a freedman and salinator, a salt burner. He has been working the salt pans for nearly 30 years. His hands are cracked, his face sunburned, his tunic stained white from countless days hauling brine. He doesn't speak much, only gestures, but you learn quickly by watching. At sunrise, he and his two assistants, both local Britons, begin by lighting the brine kilns, narrow trenches filled with wood beneath large lead or bronze pans. The fire must be hot enough to boil the water, but not so intense as to damage the pans. Too much heat will cause impurities to crust along the bottom. Salt, it turns out, is a patient task. The brine is poured in slowly from large amphorae, brought from the collection troughs nearby. Each amphora is stamped with the mark of the officina, the registered workshop. This ensures the salt can be taxed and traced. A small wooden ladle is used to test salinity. The brine is judged by eye, taste, and touch. You ask Gaius how he knows when it's ready. He shrugs. "You'll know," he says, "when it stings your lip and leaves your skin dry." Labor and heat. The boiling begins. As the brine simmers, steam rises, thick and sulphurous, mingling with the sharp scent of wood smoke. The room grows unbearably hot. Even in the cold of the Britannic morning, sweat begins to drip from your brow. Gaius scrapes the bottom of the pan with a wide wooden paddle, loosening the salt crust as it begins to form. This is delicate work. Too early and the salt dissolves. Too late and it burns. The men work in shifts. After 2 hours, the first pan is drained. The salt slurry is poured into molds, small wooden trays lined with linen, and left to dry near the hearth. This is coarse salt, used for curing meat. Finer salt will be made later, cooled more slowly, filtered more carefully, and sold to wealthier clients, including local Roman administrators and the occasional merchant caravan bound for Londinium. But even the coarse salt is valuable. A day's yield from a single boiling pan may be enough to preserve an entire boar, or to trade for tools, grain, or even cloth. The quiet of repetition. There is no rush. Salt cannot be forced. Each batch takes hours. Each task requires care. You notice how no one speaks unless needed. Instructions are given with a nod, a look, a tap of the paddle. There is rhythm here, not in speech, but in movement. And as the fire burns and the brine hisses, you begin to feel the slow drumbeat of survival. Gaius wipes his forehead and sips from a clay jug of watered-down wine. He offers you a drink. It tastes of smoke and salt. Outside, the wind blows over the marshes, bending reeds and carrying the distant cry of gulls. The world feels far away from Rome, but the empire needs this place. Because without salt, armies cannot march. Flesh cannot last. Empire rots. Nearby lives. Beyond the saltworks is a small vicus, or settlement, a cluster of huts where the families of workers live. Gaius does not have a family of his own, but he sometimes visits the potter's wife, who sells him clay bowls for drying salt. Children here learn early to respect the saltworks. No playing in the troughs, no running through the drying racks, no stealing. Even the youngest know the penalties not from law, but from the unforgiving gears of necessity. There are no luxuries here. Evenings are spent cleaning paddles, mending wooden troughs, or hauling fresh firewood for the next day's burning. The salt must never stop. The governor in Eboracum expects monthly shipments, and failure is not an option. Trade and measurement. Once a week, a tallyman arrives from the regional tax office. He inspects the amphory, stamps the salt, and updates the production log. Weights are measured in libri and modii pounds and pecks, and cross-checked against the expected quotas. Some salt is stored on site in stone-lined pits. The rest is loaded into ox-drawn carts, sealed in wax sacks, and sent east toward the Roman roads. Everything is documented, even salt. Because in Rome, nothing moves without a record. And the salt, plain and white as it may seem, is a controlled substance. Its movement is as closely watched as coinage or grain. Gaius once told a story half-true, perhaps of a fellow salinator, who diluted his salt with chalk dust to stretch the profit. They found him a week later, face down in the marsh, his fingers blistered from the lime. Gaius doesn't tell stories often, but you remember that one. And it stays with you. Sunset in the brine fields. As the sun dips low over the Severn, its reflection turns the brine pools silver. The fire dies down. The last batch of salt cools in its mold. The workers rinse their hands in a bucket of cold water, then rub them with dry sand to remove the residue. It's a ritual harsh, but effective. You walk with Gaius to the edge of the salt fields. He points to the horizon, where the road bends east toward the interior. That's where the salt goes, he says, but it always begins here. And then he adds more softly, they'll never remember us, but they'll taste us. You consider that. How this place, this forgotten outpost on the empire's fringe, shapes flavor, trade, preservation, and survival across thousands of miles. And you ask yourself, what is history built on if not the invisible labors of people who kept the world from spoiling, one grain of salt at a time? The hearth fires are lit again before dawn. Steam curls through the rafters of the boiling shed, drifting up into the beams like offerings to no god in particular. There are no temples here, only salt. No incense, only the pungent reek of brine and wood smoke. And yet to men like Gaius Lentulus, this work borders on sacred. You step inside as he stirs the pan's cloudy surface. The first crust of new salt begins to form like frost on water. The fire beneath pops and hisses, protesting the dampness of the morning wood. The labor has not changed, but today the world around Salone stirs differently. A messenger has arrived, and with him the outer fingers of Roman bureaucracy. A visit from the procurator's office. From the East Road, a cart rolls in under armed escort. It bears a representative of the provincial procurator, the financial administrator for the Roman province of Britannia Inferior. He is a tall man with narrow eyes and a spotless cloak. His name is Valerius Attilius, and he is here to conduct a salt audit. No one welcomes an audit. The workers line up their stamped amphory. The tallyman, a Gaul named Marcellus, mutters under his breath as he organizes the wax tablets, inventory logs, and tally sticks. Valerius walks the site slowly, asking few questions but watching everything. He inspects the drying racks, the brine sources, even the firewood piles. Gaius notes silently that he counts how many trees have been felled this month. You begin to understand, salt is not simply a mineral, it is regulation, control, empire. Rome tolerates chaos at its borders so long as the roads remain passable, the troops fed, and the salt collected. The empire's teeth. The tax on salt, like the tax on grain or wine, is part of a vast network known as the Annona system, a logistical miracle, designed to feed, pay and maintain the military and urban centers. Salt is gathered here, in forgotten corners like Salony. It is stamped, recorded, and shipped along designated roads to be counted again in Londinium, Camulaginum, and across the sea to Gaul. From there, it reaches legions in the Danube basin, fish salters in Massilia, or even cheese makers near Mediolanum. This invisible chain with its carts, its scribes, its enforcers is Rome's true infrastructure, not the aqueducts, not the amphitheaters. Salt. Gaius explains this with few words. If the salt stops, he says, the meat rots, and the men don't march. He scratches the inside of the pan with his wooden paddle and lifts a clump of salt. It shines. White as marble, he adds, but heavier than stone. Lives tangled in brine. While the procurator's men count amphorae, you wander past the salt fields to the vicus, the workers' hamlet. Here, salt has seeped into everything. The soil is too saline to grow anything but onions and garlic. Even the livestock must be rotated or their hooves crack from the buildup. Salt cakes the windowsills. Children play with salt-crusted stones. Women scrub their washing with brine-soaked cloths. It's a hard life, but predictable. And in an empire that crushes unpredictability, predictability is survival. You meet Junia, the potter's wife. She speaks of her husband's hands cracked from clay dust, burned from kiln heat. He molds the salt molds. Without him there is no drying. Without drying, no transport. Her eldest son is 10. He fetches wood from the marsh. Her youngest, 7, is already learning to identify brine's strength by color alone. They will never be soldiers, she says, but they will feed them. You sense no shame in that. Only understanding. Ghost in the salt. There is a legend the workers whisper about. Centuries ago, before the Romans came, a local Celtic tribe worshipped a salt spirit, a goddess who wept brine tears into the marshes. To disturb her springs was to bring misfortune. No one believes in her now. But still, some of the Britain workers drop a pebble in the spring before the first draw each morning. Just in case. Even Gaius, who scoffs at superstition, admits the brine has a personality. Some days it flows like oil, he says. Other days it stings like vinegar. You learn not to trust it. You begin to understand the layers of labor beneath the salt, not just physical but cultural, ritual, memory that has no name, only practice. In Salony, you work for Rome, but you live under older laws. The auditor's displeasure. Back in the salt yard, Valerius is not pleased. The last inventory does not match. 4 amphorae are missing from the official tally. Marcellus insists they were cracked and discarded due to spoilage. Valerius demands records. Gaius, though not responsible for storage, is summoned to explain. He listens silently, then walks to the waste pit. There, among splinters of wood and broken clay, he retrieves the fragments of the missing amphorae, each stamped with the workshop's mark. He lays them at Valerius's feet. A tense silence. The procurator's man sniffs, makes a note, and says nothing more. But you realize something else. If Gaius had not known where to look, if he hadn't taken the time to remember, to defend even broken jars, someone would have suffered. And in Rome, displeasure travels faster than truth. Dusk fires in the future. By nightfall, the audit is complete. Valerius departs with his escort, leaving behind silence and the scent of horse sweat. Gaius and the others gather around the hearth. They eat lentils, dip bread in oil, and drink slightly spoiled wine. No one speaks of the audit. They only speak of firewood quotas, brine yields, and the strange shift in weather that might slow evaporation next week. You sit beside them, the salt drying in your hair, and realize this is what keeps the empire standing. Not marble, but routine. Gaius watches the fire, then says softly, They say we are the edge of empire. He shakes his head. We are the ones holding it up. And perhaps you wonder, how many pillars of civilization, how many nameless workers, laboring in wind and brine, kept Rome from crumbling, without ever setting foot in its walls? The rains return. Late autumn has settled over Britannia like a damp cloak. Clouds hang heavy above the Severn, and every footstep squelches in thick gray mud. The salt pans are quieter now the fires still burn, but the yields shrink. Brine evaporates more slowly in the cold. Salt crystals cling stubbornly to the pans. Production drops, but the demands do not. The governor in Eboracum sends word. The winter allotment must be delivered before the Saturnalia feast. No exceptions, no delays. Inside the boiling shed, Gaius Lentulus stands before the pan with his hands wrapped in linen cloth. His knuckles are inflamed, his joints swollen. The salt has found its way into his bones. Still he works. Still the salt must be burned. The bodies toll. There are no old salt burners. This is a truth whispered in Salinae. The salt strips everything, not just water from meat, but life from flesh. The brine air scars the lungs. The repeated lifting of amphorae warps spines. Lead pans, despite their efficiency, poison slowly, imperceptibly. Gaius knows this. So do his assistants. One of them, a Briton named Cadfin, recently began coughing up blood in the mornings. He says nothing, but the red stain on his sleeve betrays him. Still he shows up before sunrise. Still he lights the fire. You begin to see the cost of this work, a cost not measured in coin or rations, but in years. In fingernails that never grow right again. In bones that ache even in dreams. And yet none leave. Not because they love it, but because salt keeps the body fed, and fed means alive. A shipment interrupted. 3 days before the final shipment is due, disaster strikes. One of the ox-drawn carts, laden with 20 amphorae of premium salt, sinks into the marsh edge. The wheel snaps, 2 amphorae shatter. Brine leaks into the earth. The road becomes a churned mess of hoofprints and clay. Panic spreads like fire. Marcellus, the tallyman, loses his temper. Gaius says little, but you see the muscles in his jaw tense as he calculates. They do not have enough salt to replace the lost shipment, not in time. There is talk of falsifying the log, of mixing fine salt with coarse to stretch the weight. Gaius refuses. Better to send truth late than lies early, he says. But Rome may not agree. And punishment can fall hard even on the innocent. Salt as currency, salt as judgment. The next day, you watch Gaius take 3 apprentices, including the young boy, Rufus, to the deep brine spring. This one has stronger salinity, but it's farther and harder to draw from. They carry double the usual amphorae. They boil through the night. Sleep is abandoned. The fire is fed constantly. The salt is pulled early, dried faster than usual. It is not perfect, but it is honest. By the time the replacement shipment is loaded, the men have not slept for 36 hours. Gaius stumbles once while lifting a mold and cuts his hand. Salt pours into the wound. He does not cry out, only rinses it with more brine. The salt does not forgive. The cart departs at dawn. The amphorae bear the workshop's stamp, and the faint, newly etched mark of a circle inside a square, Gaius's quiet symbol for urgency under honor. No one else knows what it means. But you will. The end of the season. Winter sets in fully. Frost creeps across the brine pools. The fires now serve more to warm hands than to boil salt. Production pauses. The men rest, if only for a few weeks. Salt storage is inventoried. Molds are repaired. Amphorae are patched with pitch. Tools are sharpened. Even the children of the Vicu stop playing. They huddle indoors, soot on their cheeks, waiting for spring. Gaius takes to walking the marsh paths in the morning. His hands no longer close all the way. He says little. One evening, you find him staring out across the brine fields as fog rolls in, silver and soft. He turns to you and says, "I never knew how many types of silence there were until I learned to listen to the salt." You do not reply, but you hear it too. The hiss of wind over flat water, the creak of drying racks, the quiet of things endured. The quiet legacy. When you ask Gaius why he stayed so long in Salony, why he never moved to Londinium or sought easier work in grain mills or shipyards, he gives a small laugh. "Because I'm needed here." He looks at his hands. "Because someone must keep the salt honest." And then he says something you will remember for the rest of your life. History remembers kings and wars, but it forgets what kept the meat from spoiling. You look around. At the cracked amphory, the brine pools, the soot-stained beams. At the footprints in mud that will disappear by morning. And you understand. These are the people who held civilization together quietly, not through speeches or battles, but through routine, resilience, and unremarkable sacrifice. Not saints, not heroes, salt keepers. And perhaps, as the last fire of the season dies to embers, you wonder how many other forgotten places, damp, cold, and unadorned, once carried the weight of an empire on their backs, without ever asking to be remembered.